If you've known me long enough on this channel, you know that I love the Steam Deck. This portable PC is a powerhouse, and for the low price of $350 for the LCD model these days, it's a steal. One of the finest devices ever made in my opinion, and the software is what exactly makes the Steam Deck so special. Without it, it would be a mess. If it used Windows, it would be a mess. But Valve have found a way to make Steam work beautifully on their handheld and integrate it properly with the controls that they give you on this device. And of course, the OLED model for the Steam Deck is even better. Yes, you pay £100 more for it in this country. However, the whole host of improvements are incredible. So good in fact that I would urge you to go for it if you can afford it. There is one thing about the Steam Deck that worries everyone who goes for it though. It's the lack of support for certain games. And I'm here to tell you that although not everything can be supported, a lot of it can work if you use a thing called Proton layers. Let's talk about it. Hello and welcome back. Yes, you heard me right. Games that are unsupported on Steam Deck can still work if you use a thing called Proton layers. What's a Proton layer? Okay, I'll admit folks, I'm not a Linux person, so please forgive me if I get this completely wrong, but essentially a Proton layer is a piece of software that you can download from the application store when you switch to gaming mode on the Steam Deck that allows you to translate certain games from the Windows operating system to Linux operating system. Again, I may be explaining that very poorly, so if someone in the comments can explain it better, then please do, and I would absolutely love it because I think more of us want to know how it works. It's basically a translation layer. It translates the Windows of executional system and all that stuff into the one that Linux can read, and then Linux will attempt to boot it. Now, I don't exactly know what or why or how these things work, because some games work when this does get applied and others do not. But all you need to know is, folks, is if you go and download the Proton layer, some games that say they're unsupported on Steam will work. And in fact, I will give you a real life demonstration right now. So, you can see, if I put this closer to you, this is WRC. It's the newest game from Codemasters and EA. And this is basically Dirt Rally 3. This is what Dirt Rally 3 would have been. You can see on the icon there, it's got a white icon with a line through it. And that means the game is unsupported. So if I click on it, and if I go to Game Info, you can see there on Game Info, it says that the game is unsupported. Okay? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do this live on camera so you can see. I'm going to go to my settings. I'm going to go to Properties. And you can see now I'm on compatibility, okay? So on compatibility, I forced it to use that particular Proton. Now, if I go to the Proton section, you can see there's other options as well. Obviously, Proton Experimental is already with the device by default, I believe. If it's not, you can download it. But you can see I've got the other GE ones as well, which I tend to use a lot. I tend to use GE7-54. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to turn off the compatibility, and let's see what happens. So I'm going to talk you through it. So right now, I'm going to try and play the game without the Proton layer. Sometimes the games will actually work without it, even though the game says unsupported. Let's just see what happens with this game if we try and play it without the Proton layer. So you can see there's the Steam logo there. It may take a moment for it to boot. This is normal. So let's see what happens now. This is going off my SD card, so it takes a little while to load. Oh, and as you can see straight away, the game booted. So sometimes, even though a game says unsupported, you don't always need the Proton layer. However, if you do then use the Proton layer, sometimes the game will perform better. It may allow certain things to happen with the game to allow it to work even better, or it can bypass certain sections that the game doesn't like that you cannot get through without the Proton layer. So it goes to show you folks that if you have the unsupported symbol, don't automatically assume that the Steam Deck won't play it. But even then, I still strongly suggest you download the Proton layer because it will make some games function and it will make your gaming library even more accessible than you might imagine. I will also say folks that if you get a game that has a circle around it and a question mark, that also can mean that the game may not be supported. So again, I do recommend you download the Proton layer just in case you get a game where it's either unsupported or no one knows if it works. But I find that a lot of the games that say these little symbols do tend to boot. I've just tried to boot several games since recording this with all the same stuff, and amazingly they all work. So just goes to show how well optimized Steam Deck is. And of course, don't forget now, the operating system has changed in the 2 years that the Steam Deck has been launched, so maybe more games now just have better native support anyway. So unsupported games definitely should not be anything to fear. That being said though, there are some games that just do not work because the Steam OS lacks certain abilities to work. So for example, with Call of Duty, the newest ones, it needs Battle.net, and SteamOS just does not have that function. Even if you use the Proton layer, it just still will not connect and work. So certain cheat softwares don't work well with SteamOS, and that's why it's still recommended for those games that you should get the Windows version. But overall though, folks, if you download a GE Proton layer or use Proton Experimental, that definitely will work. Also, one other thing I need to explain as well, if you have a game that used to work but then no longer works using the Proton layer, you need to go into the Steam directory, delete everything. So delete the game off your Steam Deck, go into your desktop mode, go into the actual folder where the game used to live, and there'll be a number for it. Delete the number, delete the save game. That deletes everything off the Steam Deck besides the custom controls if you had them set up already, which is what you want if you're playing a game like, say, Outlaws, which obviously you need custom controls unless you plan to use keyboard and mouse. Reinstall the game, reinstall the Proton layer, and the game should boot again. I managed to get Dragon Ball FighterZ working this way because that game used to work and then it stopped working. Also, if a Proton layer doesn't work the first time, try another one, or try booting it more than once, because again, with Dragon Ball FighterZ, I had to boot the game twice before the game finally ran. So there are certain circumstances and instances where you may have to try a game more than once to get it to work. But ultimately, if a game is unsupported on Steam and you're not sure about which game you want to play, I highly recommend that before you buy a Steam Deck, you Google or YouTube the game that you want to play and just check and see if anyone has got the game to work, either by just playing the game naturally or using a Proton layer. And again, see if a Proton layer improves game performance over just launching it natively through Steam. So these are the things you need to know. For most people, most of the games that work on Steam do work beautifully on Steam Deck using its Linux operating system. So for most of you, there's no worries regarding which games work. Of course, if you're playing a game that's a lot older, say Outlaws or Empire Earth or Star Wars Dark Forces, for example, games of that nature, or if you're worried about modern games that say they're unsupported, the results might surprise you. They may just work. Again, EAWRC does work on Steam Deck. Okay, the frame rate is not the highest unless you are willing to put into potato quality, but even at 30 frames per second, you can have relatively high graphics with low shadows, and the game will mostly hit 30. I know for a racing game that's not ideal, but it will do. You know, it works. That's the important thing. Anyway, folks, you guys let me know. What are your thoughts on the Steam Deck with its unsupported games or the games with the question mark around it? Have you had great luck playing games that feature this symbol? Or do you feel that maybe it's just best to have a Windows device to avoid any headaches? Although I will just say that some games do work better on Steam Deck under Linux. And of course, what are your recommendations for those of you who do have games that are unsupported? What Proton layer do you think people should use? Experimental, a GE, or what? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you next time.